You think a janitor can solve what Harvard's best doctors can't? Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the tension-filled executive conference room at Sterling Medical Center, Manhattan's most exclusive private hospital. Marcus had been cleaning nearby when he overheard the doctors discussing her mysterious illness. Unable to stay silent while watching them pursue the wrong diagnostic path entirely, he'd stepped forward with a confident medical observation that made the room fall silent. Victoria's brother Robert immediately erupted with something far uglier than class prejudice. "Get this black janitor away from here," he snarled, moving to physically block Marcus from the table. "We're not taking medical advice from his kind." But Victoria, desperate after months of deteriorating health and facing experimental treatments with deadly odds, made an impossible offer that would change everything. "Fine. Heal me and I'll marry you. Have you ever been dismissed because of your job while someone else tried to destroy you because of your race?" The words hung in the air like a challenge that defied everything logical about the world. Victoria Sterling, heiress to a pharmaceutical empire worth $12 billion, had just offered marriage to Marcus Thompson, a night shift janitor whose monthly salary wouldn't cover her weekly jewelry budget. The executive conference room at Sterling Medical Center had become an unlikely stage for this bizarre proposal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline, while inside, the mahogany table groaned under the weight of medical files, test results, and the mounting desperation of 8 months without answers. Dr. Sarah Lane from Johns Hopkins sat frozen with her pen halfway to her notepad. Dr. Klaus Weber from Switzerland had stopped mid-sentence, his thick accent trapped somewhere between German and English. The third specialist, Dr. Martinez from Mayo Clinic, simply stared at Victoria as if she'd announced her intention to marry her houseplant. But it was Robert Sterling who broke the stunned silence. "Victoria, you can't be serious." Her younger brother's voice carried the sharp edge of panic disguised as outrage. "This is some random black janitor who probably didn't even finish high school. You're talking about marrying beneath our family's status in the most embarrassing way possible." Marcus remained perfectly still, his dark eyes moving calmly between the siblings. At 34, he'd learned to read the undercurrents in rooms where his presence was barely tolerated. Victoria's offer stemmed from desperation, not attraction. Robert's objection stemmed from something far uglier than family concern. "Robert, I'm dying." Victoria's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent months watching her body betray her. "These brilliant doctors with their prestigious degrees and million-dollar equipment can't figure out what's wrong with me. Maybe it's time to try a different approach." The condition had started subtly. Occasional muscle weakness that Victoria initially attributed to stress from expanding Sterling Pharmaceuticals into Asian markets. Then came the tremors that made signing contracts difficult. The brain fog that turned board meetings into exhausting mental obstacle courses. The joint pain that left her bedridden for days at a time. Each specialist had arrived with confidence and departed with bewilderment. Dr. Lane had ruled out lupus, multiple sclerosis, and a dozen other autoimmune conditions. Dr. Weber had conducted genetic testing that revealed nothing conclusive. Dr. Martinez had overseen experimental treatments that provided temporary relief before the symptoms returned with increased severity. The latest round of blood work painted an increasingly grim picture. Victoria's inflammatory markers suggested her immune system was attacking something, but identifying the target remained elusive. Her neurological symptoms pointed toward demyelination, yet MRI scans showed minimal damage. Most concerning was the progression each month brought new symptoms and reduced function. "The experimental gene therapy we discussed carries significant risks," Dr. Lane said carefully, her medical training warring with her conscience. "But given the rapid progression of your symptoms, we may need to consider more aggressive interventions." Victoria understood the subtext. The experimental treatment had an 80% mortality rate. She was being offered a coin flip with death, and the odds weren't in her favor. "Which brings us back to my offer," Victoria said, her gaze settling on Marcus. "You seemed confident that these doctors are missing something. What exactly do you think you know that they don't?" Robert stepped between them, his body language screaming territorial protection. "Victoria, this is insane. You're going to trust our family's reputation and your life to some janitor who probably learned medicine from watching hospital dramas?" Marcus spoke for the first time since Victoria's shocking proposal. His voice carried quiet authority that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including himself. "I've been cleaning this hospital for 3 years. I've observed more medical consultations than most residents see in their entire training. I've watched patterns that doctors miss because they're focused on textbook presentations instead of environmental factors." Environmental factors. Dr. Weber leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his skepticism. "What kind of environmental factors?" "The kind that only affects people with unlimited access to luxury products manufactured with rare earth elements," Marcus replied. "The kind that creates the perfect storm when combined with chronic stress and genetic predisposition." Robert's face flushed with anger. "You see? He's just throwing around medical terminology he doesn't understand. This is exactly what these people do. They mimic intelligence to take advantage of desperate white families." The racist undertone hit the room like a physical slap. Dr. Lane's professional composure cracked for just a moment, her disapproval evident. Dr. Weber cleared his throat uncomfortably. Dr. Martinez focused intently on her notes, as if documenting the exchange for future reference. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Victoria caught it, a subtle straightening that suggested Robert had just crossed a line that would have consequences. "These people?" Victoria's voice carried a dangerous quiet. "Robert, choose your next words very carefully." But her brother was too panicked about his inheritance prospects to recognize the warning. "I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake that will humiliate our entire family." Marrying a janitor is bad enough, but a black janitor who's clearly running some kind of medical con game? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the building's HVAC system seemed to hold its breath. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady and professional. "Ms. Sterling, your brother's concerns about my qualifications are understandable. I don't have an MD after my name or a diploma on my wall. What I do have is 7 years of medical school before life circumstances forced me to take a different path." Victoria's eyebrows raised. 7 years? University of Michigan. I was 6 months from graduating when my mother developed an autoimmune condition similar to yours. The medical bills and her care requirements made finishing school impossible. Robert scoffed. "Convenient story. I suppose your mother died tragically, giving you deep personal motivation to solve mysterious medical cases." "She did die," Marcus said simply, "because doctors focused on treating her symptoms instead of identifying the environmental triggers that caused them." The weight of his words settled over the room. Victoria studied Marcus's face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. What she found was something unexpected: grief tempered by determination, and knowledge earned through loss rather than lecture halls. "Dr. Lane," Victoria said without breaking eye contact with Marcus, "from a medical perspective, is it possible for someone to gain legitimate expertise outside traditional training?" Dr. Lane considered her words carefully. "Medical knowledge exists in many forms. Some of our greatest breakthroughs have come from unconventional sources. The question isn't whether Mr. Thompson has formal credentials, but whether his observations have merit." Robert's desperation reached a new level. "You're all acting like this makes sense. Victoria, if you go through with this insane marriage proposal, the board will declare you mentally incompetent. I'll make sure of it." There it was, the real motivation behind Robert's objections. Not family honor or medical concern, but the prospect of inheriting $12 billion slipping away because his sister might actually survive. Victoria's smile held no warmth. "Robert, I think you've said enough. I'm trying to save you from... You're trying to save yourself from losing an inheritance you've never earned." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Robert's face cycled through denial, anger, and finally a cold calculation that confirmed Victoria's suspicion. Marcus watched the family drama unfold with the detached interest of someone who'd learned to observe rather than participate. But when Robert turned his attention back to him, the calculation shifted to something more dangerous. "Fine," Robert said. "Let's say we entertain this fantasy. What exactly is your miracle diagnosis, janitor?" The contempt in his voice was designed to provoke. Marcus recognized the tactic forced him to overstep his knowledge, expose himself as a fraud, and eliminate the threat to Robert's inheritance in one public humiliation. But Marcus had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, even if he'd never imagined it would come in the form of a marriage proposal from a desperate billionaire. "I'll need access to your complete medical files," Marcus said to Victoria. "Your travel records for the past 2 years. A detailed inventory of your jewelry, cosmetics, and any supplements you take regularly. And I'll need to run some tests that your other doctors haven't considered." Dr. Weber frowned. "What kind of tests?" "Heavy metal screening, specifically rare earth elements used in luxury manufacturing. I suspect Ms. Sterling's condition isn't genetic or autoimmune in the traditional sense. I think she's being slowly poisoned by her own lifestyle." The room erupted in discussion. Dr. Lane pulled out her phone, already researching heavy metal toxicity. Dr. Weber began questioning Marcus about specific symptoms and timelines. Dr. Martinez scribbled notes furiously, her medical curiosity fully engaged. But Robert saw only one thing: his inheritance walking away on the legs of a theory proposed by someone he considered inferior in every way that mattered to him. The war for Victoria's life was about to begin. And Marcus was about to discover that saving her would require defeating more than just a mysterious illness. But what Marcus was about to reveal would shatter everything these world-renowned doctors thought they knew, and Robert would do anything to stop him. The weight of Victoria's marriage proposal settled over Marcus like a familiar burden, another moment when life demanded he prove his worth to people who'd already decided he had none. But this time felt different. This time, the stakes weren't just his pride or his job. Someone's life hung in the balance, and he'd been here before. Detroit, 15 years earlier. Marcus had knelt beside his mother's hospital bed, watching monitors display the same baffling array of symptoms that now plagued Victoria Sterling. The irony wasn't lost on him. A billionaire and a community health worker, separated by every imaginable barrier except the disease that didn't discriminate based on bank accounts. "Every patient deserves the right diagnosis, baby." His mother's voice had grown weak, but her conviction remained strong even as the autoimmune condition ravaged her body. "Doesn't matter if they can afford the fancy hospital or the free clinic. The truth is the truth." Elena Thompson had spent 20 years serving Detroit's underserved communities, treating everything from childhood asthma to diabetic emergencies in neighborhoods where ambulances arrived late and specialist appointments were luxuries few could afford. She'd taught Marcus to see patterns that others missed, not because she possessed some mystical intuition, but because necessity had sharpened her observational skills to a razor's edge. "The human body tells you exactly what's wrong," she'd explained during his childhood, letting him shadow her during home visits. "But you have to listen to what it's actually saying, not what you expect to hear." Those lessons had carried Marcus through 7 years at the University of Michigan Medical School. While his classmates relied on textbook presentations and algorithmic thinking, Marcus learned to observe environmental factors that traditional medical training often overlooked. His professors had noted his unusual diagnostic approach, a combination of clinical rigor and street-smart pattern recognition that set him apart from his peers. The full scholarship had seemed like salvation, a path out of poverty that would honor his mother's legacy while ensuring financial security for both of them. Marcus had thrown himself into his studies with single-minded determination, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time jobs to supplement his living expenses. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Marcus, honey, I need you to come home." His mother's voice had carried a tremor he'd never heard before. "Something's wrong with me, and the doctors here don't know what it is." The symptoms had started subtly joint pain that Elena attributed to years of being on her feet. Muscle weakness she blamed on stress from managing the clinic's chronic understaffing. But as weeks passed, the pattern became undeniable. Her immune system was attacking something, but identifying the target proved elusive. Marcus had driven home that weekend expecting to offer comfort and maybe help coordinate better medical care. Instead, he'd found his mother bedridden, her condition deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The local physicians were baffled. Specialist appointments required months-long waits they couldn't afford. Insurance coverage for experimental treatments remained perpetually under review. "I can't leave you like this," Marcus had told her, already knowing what his decision would cost him. "Baby, you're 6 months from graduating medical school. 6 months from having the knowledge and credentials to help people like me." "You're not people like you. You're my mother." Elena had smiled through her pain. "And that's exactly why you need to finish school. So this doesn't happen to someone else's mother." But Marcus couldn't watch her suffer while pursuing theoretical knowledge that wouldn't arrive in time to save her. He'd withdrawn from medical school, forfeiting his scholarship and his dreams to become his mother's full-time caregiver and medical advocate. The next 8 months had been a masterclass in medical frustration. Marcus had researched every symptom, contacted specialists across the country, and gradually developed a theory about environmental triggers that no one wanted to consider. His mother's condition shared disturbing parallels with cases he'd found in obscure medical journals, autoimmune responses triggered by specific combinations of chemical exposures and genetic predispositions. But without medical credentials, his insights were dismissed as desperate speculation from a grieving son. The experimental treatment he'd identified remained inaccessible due to cost and bureaucratic barriers. Elena Thompson died on a Tuesday morning in March, her hand clasped in her son's, as he whispered promises he hadn't yet figured out how to keep. "Every breakdown is a breakdown in communication," Marcus said quietly, the words carrying 15 years of grief and determination. "Between human and machine, between what we think we know and what actually is." Victoria looked up from the medical files she'd been reviewing. "What did you say?" "Something my mother taught me. She believed that disease doesn't lie. It tells you exactly what's wrong if you listen carefully enough." Robert rolled his eyes. "More folksy wisdom from the janitor philosopher. Victoria, this is getting ridiculous." But Dr. Lane had stopped taking notes, her attention fully focused on Marcus. "Your mother, was she in healthcare?" "Community health worker. 20 years serving Detroit's underserved populations. She died of an autoimmune condition similar to your sister's because the medical establishment couldn't see past their assumptions about environmental triggers." The silence that followed carried weight. Marcus had just revealed his deepest motivation and his greatest failure in the same breath. Victoria studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or emotional exploitation. Instead, she found something that resonated with her own desperation, the look of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered and had nothing left to lose. "The truth doesn't care about your credentials," Marcus continued, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "It doesn't care about your background or your bank account. Disease is democratic that way. It affects rich and poor alike, but the solutions often hide in places that prestigious institutions won't look." The medical files spread across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle that had defied solution for 8 months. Victoria Sterling's complete medical history painted a picture of progressive decline that had stumped some of the world's most brilliant minds. Now, in a moment that defied every convention of medical hierarchy, she was about to entrust her life to a janitor armed with theories instead of degrees. 72 hours, Victoria announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. "That's how long you have to prove your theory before I proceed with the experimental gene therapy." Dr. Lane shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Ms. Sterling, I need to advise against delaying treatment. Your condition is progressing rapidly and—" And the gene therapy has an 80% mortality rate, Victoria interrupted. I think I can spare 3 days to explore an alternative that doesn't involve Russian roulette. Robert Sterling had been pacing behind the conference table like a caged animal, his inheritance slipping further away with each moment his sister remained alive and coherent. The marriage proposal had been shocking enough, but now Victoria was seriously considering medical advice from someone Robert viewed as fundamentally inferior. "This is insane," Robert exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. "You're going to risk your life on theories from some black janitor who probably couldn't even get into medical school?" Marcus looked up from the medical files, his expression calm despite the racial slur disguised as concern. "Actually, I completed 7 years at University of Michigan before circumstances required me to leave." "Circumstances?" Robert's laugh carried no humor. "Let me guess. You couldn't handle the academic rigor? Or maybe you were expelled for cheating. The accusation hung in the air like poison." Dr. Weber cleared his throat uncomfortably, while Dr. Martinez focused intently on her notes to avoid witnessing the exchange. Even Dr. Lane, who'd maintained professional neutrality, looked disturbed by Robert's escalating aggression. Marcus remained perfectly still, but Victoria caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. She'd spent enough time in corporate boardrooms to recognize when someone was being systematically attacked, and she'd developed a particular distaste for people who weaponized prejudice to advance their own agendas. "Robert, you're out of line," Victoria said sharply. "I'm trying to save your life from a con artist who's obviously targeting wealthy white women with fake medical expertise." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert had just crossed from subtle racism into explicit accusations that revealed the ugly core of his motivations. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying quiet dignity that made Robert's panic seem even more pathetic by comparison. "My mother died while I was caring for her. The financial burden of her medical expenses and the time required for her care made completing medical school impossible." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. Not sympathy, exactly, but recognition. She'd built her pharmaceutical empire on the principle that healthcare shouldn't be rationed by economic status. Yet here was someone who'd sacrificed his own medical career to provide care that the system had failed to deliver. Dr. Lane leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding protocol concerns. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned environmental triggers. Can you be more specific about your hypothesis?" Marcus moved to the wall-mounted whiteboard, his movements confident despite the hostile audience. "Ms. Sterling's symptoms suggest autoimmune dysfunction, but the progression pattern doesn't match traditional presentations. The key is identifying what her immune system is actually attacking." He began sketching a timeline on the board, correlating Victoria's symptom onset with her travel schedule and business activities. His handwriting was precise, his medical terminology accurate, and his logic methodical. Robert watched with growing alarm as Marcus demonstrated knowledge that contradicted every assumption about his capabilities. "Heavy metal toxicity," Marcus said, circling specific dates on the timeline. "Specifically rare earth elements used in luxury manufacturing. Ms. Sterling's lifestyle provides unlimited access to products containing materials that most people never encounter." Dr. Weber frowned. "Heavy metals can cause neurological symptoms, but the autoimmune component is triggered when the immune system identifies metal-damaged tissue as foreign," Marcus finished. "The body begins attacking itself because it can't distinguish between healthy cells and cells altered by toxic exposure." Robert stepped closer to the whiteboard, his voice dripping with condescension. "So your brilliant theory is that my sister is being poisoned by her jewelry? That's the medical breakthrough that's going to save her life?" "It's more complex than that," Marcus replied patiently. "The toxicity requires a perfect storm of factors: genetic predisposition, chronic stress that suppresses natural detoxification, and exposure to specific combinations of rare earth elements. Ms. Sterling's high-stress business lifestyle, combined with her access to custom jewelry and cosmetics manufactured with exotic materials, creates the ideal conditions. Victoria had been listening intently, her business mind processing the logic of Marcus's hypothesis. What kind of testing would prove your theory? Comprehensive heavy metal screening, focusing on elements like europium, dysprosium, and terbium. Hair follicle analysis to establish exposure timeline. Genetic testing for detoxification pathway variants. Dr. Lane was already pulling out her phone. I can arrange those tests immediately. Robert's panic reached a new level as he watched the medical team take Marcus seriously. You're all being manipulated by someone who's clearly researched Victoria's symptoms online and is regurgitating information to seem knowledgeable. Then it should be easy to disprove his theory, Victoria said coolly. If the testing shows no heavy metal toxicity, we proceed with gene therapy. If it confirms his hypothesis, we explore treatment options. The room fell silent, except for the scratch of Dr. Martinez's pen as she documented every exchange. Marcus recognized the moment for what it was, a public trial where his credibility would be tested against established medical authority. But unlike the academic environment he'd been forced to abandon, this trial had immediate life-or-death consequences. Robert made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Victoria, if you go through with this circus, I'll petition the board to declare you mentally incompetent. No judge will support medical decisions based on advice from an unqualified janitor. Victoria's smile held an ice-cold calculation. Robert, I think we're past the point where your opinion matters. I'm trying to protect our family's reputation. You're trying to protect your inheritance prospects. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Robert's face cycled through denial, anger, and finally cold hatred directed squarely at Marcus. This is your fault, he snarled. Coming in here with your fake medical theories, taking advantage of my sister's desperation. Marcus met Robert's glare without flinching. I'm trying to save her life. You're trying to destroy our family. Dr. Lane cleared her throat, her professional training reasserting itself. Gentlemen, we have 72 hours to conduct comprehensive testing and evaluate Mr. Thompson's hypothesis. I suggest we focus on medical evidence rather than personal conflicts. Victoria nodded. Dr. Lane is right. Marcus, you'll have full access to my medical files, test results, and whatever resources you need. Robert, you can either support this process or remove yourself from it. Robert's expression promised that this confrontation was far from over. But for now, Marcus had been granted the opportunity he'd never expected, a chance to prove that sometimes the most important medical breakthroughs come from the most unlikely sources. The real test was about to begin. The laboratory results arrived exactly 48 hours later, delivered by a courier who seemed oblivious to the fact that he was carrying evidence that could revolutionize environmental medicine. Marcus spread the test reports across the conference table like a detective laying out clues to a murder case, while the assembled medical team leaned forward with the intensity of people witnessing either a breakthrough or an elaborate fraud. The heavy metal screening confirms everything, Marcus said, his finger tracing the abnormal values highlighted in red across multiple pages. Europium levels 18 times normal range. Dysprosium at 22 times baseline. Terbium concentrations that shouldn't exist in human tissue. Dr. Lane adjusted her glasses, studying the numbers with growing amazement. These levels are extraordinary. How is this possible? Robert Sterling stood behind the group like a storm cloud, his face cycling between disbelief and rage. Those tests could be fabricated. This whole thing could be an elaborate scam run by some affirmative action medical school dropout. The tests were conducted at your own hospital's laboratory, Dr. Weber pointed out dryly, unless you're suggesting your staff is part of the conspiracy. Marcus ignored Robert's racial hostility and moved to the whiteboard, where he'd prepared a comprehensive analysis that would either vindicate his theory or expose him as a fraud. This isn't just about metal toxicity. It's about how luxury manufacturing creates the perfect storm for autoimmune dysfunction in people with unlimited purchasing power. He began his first revelation with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment, knowing that every word would be scrutinized by people looking for reasons to dismiss him. First revelation: the luxury trap. Ms. Sterling's jewelry collection contains pieces manufactured with rare earth elements that most people never encounter, Marcus explained, displaying photographs of Victoria's custom pieces alongside their detailed materials analysis. This platinum necklace contains europium oxide particles for luminescent properties that make the diamonds appear more brilliant under certain lighting conditions. These titanium earrings use dysprosium for magnetic enhancement that allows for innovative clasp mechanisms. The rose gold bracelet incorporates terbium for its unique fluorescent characteristics that create subtle color variations in different environments. Victoria examined her jewelry with new eyes, pieces she'd worn dozens of times without considering their exotic composition. Each item represented cutting-edge materials science applied to luxury fashion, creating products that were as much technological marvels as fashion statements. "But these are from the most exclusive designers in Europe," Victoria protested. "Surely they meet all safety standards." "They do," Marcus replied, pulling up regulatory documents on his tablet. "For normal exposure levels. European Union standards assume occasional wearing for special events, not daily use by someone who owns multiple pieces and rotates them regularly." Robert stepped closer to the display, his voice dripping with condescension. "So now you're an expert on European jewelry regulations? Did you learn that during your janitorial training?" Marcus continued without acknowledging the interruption. "Rare earth elements become toxic through accumulation, not acute exposure. Your skin absorbs microscopic amounts every time you wear these pieces. The absorption rate increases with skin temperature, humidity, and duration of contact." He moved to a second whiteboard covered with chemical equations and absorption calculations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of toxicology. Normally, your body's detoxification systems would eliminate these metals through hepatic processing and renal filtration. The liver enzymes break down metal protein complexes while the kidneys excrete the metabolites through urine. Dr. Martinez looked up from her rapidly filling notepad. "What's preventing normal detoxification in Miss Sterling's case?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression of satisfaction he'd shown since this ordeal began. "That brings us to the second revelation, which explains why this condition affects successful business executives disproportionately." Second revelation: the stress multiplier. "Chronic psychological stress doesn't just affect mental well-being," Marcus continued, pulling up Victoria's business calendar and travel schedule on the room's large display screen. "Look at this timeline spanning the past 18 months. Major merger negotiations with pharmaceutical companies in Germany and Switzerland, board conflicts over international expansion strategies, acquisition decisions involving hundreds of millions in capital investment." The calendar painted a picture of relentless pressure that would challenge anyone's physiological resilience. Board meetings in New York followed by red-eye flights to manufacturing facilities in Asia. Regulatory hearings in Washington sandwiched between investor presentations in London. The lifestyle of someone who'd built a global empire through sheer determination and sacrificed personal well-being for professional achievement. Each of these high-stress events triggers sustained elevation of cortisol, adrenaline, and inflammatory cytokines, Marcus explained, drawing connections between Victoria's most demanding business periods and her symptom progression with forensic precision. "Here, October merger talks with Hoffman Pharmaceuticals coincide exactly with your first episodes of muscle weakness. December board crisis over the Asian expansion matches the onset of cognitive symptoms that you attributed to fatigue. March acquisition deadline for the Swiss manufacturing facility aligns perfectly with the beginning of joint pain that progressed from occasional discomfort to daily disability." Dr. Lane was frantically documenting the correlations, her medical training recognizing patterns that she'd missed during previous consultations. Chronic cortisol elevation would suppress cytochrome P450 enzyme activity, reducing the liver's ability to process xenobiotic compounds. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. But the stress response also compromises intestinal barrier function, allowing increased absorption of toxins from the digestive tract. Your high-pressure lifestyle creates a perfect storm: increased toxin absorption combined with decreased elimination capacity. Robert had been growing visibly agitated as Marcus demonstrated knowledge that contradicted every racist assumption about his intellectual capabilities. "This is all correlation without causation," he interrupted. "Successful people experience stress. That doesn't mean stress causes mysterious illnesses." "There's more," Marcus said, moving to his third section of analysis. "Ms. Sterling, what supplements do you take regularly for executive performance and stress management?" Victoria consulted her phone, reading from a list that reflected the optimization-obsessed culture of high achievers. Vitamin D3 for immune support, omega-3 for cognitive function, magnesium for muscle recovery, and a custom mineral supplement my executive nutritionist recommended specifically for high-stress business environments. Marcus was already displaying the supplement's detailed ingredient list, with several components highlighted in red. Your custom executive mineral supplement contains trace amounts of the same rare earth elements found in your jewelry. The manufacturer uses them as bioavailability enhancers, microscopic quantities that are supposed to help your body absorb other nutrients more effectively. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Victoria wasn't just being exposed to toxic metals from external jewelry. She was voluntarily ingesting them daily in pursuit of peak performance, creating a multi-route exposure scenario that traditional medicine would never suspect. So the jewelry provides dermal exposure, the supplements provide gastrointestinal exposure, and the stress prevents elimination, Dr. Weber summarized, his voice reflecting growing amazement at the complexity of the interaction. But how does this environmental exposure trigger such severe autoimmune dysfunction? Robert made one more desperate attempt to discredit Marcus's analysis. Even if these metal levels are real, how do we know they're causing her symptoms? This could all be coincidental. Marcus moved to his final revelation with the confidence of someone who'd solved a puzzle that had stumped the world's leading medical institutions. Third revelation: the autoimmune cascade. When rare earth metals accumulate in human tissue, they bind covalently to cellular proteins and alter their three-dimensional molecular structure, Marcus explained, drawing detailed cellular diagrams that demonstrated graduate-level understanding of biochemistry and immunology. Your immune system encounters these metallated proteins and correctly identifies them as foreign antigens that don't belong in human physiology. He displayed microscopic images from Victoria's latest tissue biopsy, pointing to specific cellular changes that the original pathologists had documented but misinterpreted. See these protein aggregations in the muscle tissue? They're not random inflammatory markers or genetic abnormalities. They're immune complexes formed when antibodies target metal-damaged cellular proteins. Dr. Lane leaned closer to examine the high-resolution images, her expression shifting from skepticism to fascination. The molecular mimicry phenomenon would explain the progressive multi-system nature of her symptoms. The adaptive immune system learns to recognize the metallated proteins as foreign threats, Marcus continued, his explanation revealing a deep understanding of immunological mechanisms. But because the rare earth metals distribute throughout the body via systemic circulation, binding to proteins in multiple organ systems, the immune response becomes generalized rather than localized. He moved to a detailed anatomical chart showing metal distribution patterns based on Victoria's imaging studies. Muscle tissue shows the highest concentration because of increased blood flow during stress responses. Nervous system involvement occurs because metals cross the blood-brain barrier and bind to myelin proteins. Joint symptoms result from metal accumulation in synovial tissue where immune complexes trigger inflammatory cascades. Robert had been growing increasingly desperate as Marcus demonstrated expertise that shattered every prejudiced assumption about his intellectual capacity. This is all theoretical nonsense, he exploded. Even if your exotic metal poisoning theory is correct, what's your miracle cure? How do you propose to reverse months of autoimmune damage? Marcus turned to face Robert directly, his expression calm but radiating quiet confidence. Graduated chelation therapy using DMSA and EDTA protocols to remove accumulated metals without causing mineral depletion. Specific probiotic strains including Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Bifidobacterium longum to restore intestinal barrier function and support hepatic detoxification pathways. Targeted anti-inflammatory intervention using curcumin, omega-3 fatty acids, and low-dose naltrexone to interrupt the autoimmune cascade. And comprehensive stress management including meditation, exercise modification, and business schedule restructuring to allow the body's natural healing mechanisms to function optimally. Modified chelation therapy? Dr. Weber frowned, his European training making him cautious about unconventional treatments. That's typically reserved for acute heavy metal poisoning in industrial accidents, not chronic low-level exposure in luxury consumers. Graduated chelation, Marcus clarified, displaying research protocols from environmental medicine journals that most traditional physicians had never encountered. Lower doses administered over extended periods combined with targeted nutritional support to prevent essential mineral depletion. The goal isn't rapid detoxification that could cause redistribution effects and actually worsen symptoms. The goal is gradual metal elimination while supporting the body's innate healing capacity. He displayed peer-reviewed research papers from environmental medicine specialists who'd been documenting similar cases for decades. Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt in Germany has published extensively on this approach for treating metal-induced autoimmunity. Dr. Sherry Rogers in the United States has documented hundreds of similar cases. Dr. Andrew Cutler's chelation protocols have been refined through clinical experience with thousands of patients. The medical literature exists and the treatment outcomes are documented, but it's outside mainstream autoimmune treatment algorithms. Victoria studied the comprehensive treatment plan Marcus had prepared, noting its methodical approach and detailed monitoring protocols. This wasn't the desperate gamble of someone grasping at alternative medicine straws. It was a carefully researched intervention based on established environmental medicine principles applied to an unusual but well-documented presentation. 72 hours later, the conference room had transformed into an impromptu medical theater where Victoria Sterling's life hung in the balance. The mahogany table now supported 4 equipment, monitoring devices, and chelation solutions that represented Marcus's last chance to prove his theory could succeed where world-renowned institutions had failed. Robert Sterling paced behind the medical team like a predator waiting for his prey to collapse. His sister's recovery would destroy both his inheritance prospects and his fundamental beliefs about racial superiority. He'd spent 3 days making desperate calls to board members, trying to declare Victoria mentally incompetent. "This is medical malpractice," Robert announced. "When this kills her, I'm holding everyone responsible." Dr. Lane ignored his commentary while reviewing Marcus's chelation protocol. The treatment plan was methodical and conservative, designed to gradually remove accumulated metals without triggering dangerous redistribution effects. "Walk us through the monitoring parameters," Dr. Lane requested. Marcus moved between 4 stands with quiet confidence. DMSA chelation at half-standard dosing. Continuous cardiac monitoring because rare earth metals affect electrical conduction. Hourly neurological assessments. Blood chemistry panels every 6 hours to monitor kidney function. The 4th bag contained a clear solution that looked deceptively simple for something that could either save Victoria's life or confirm Robert's disaster predictions. Marcus had calculated dosing based on Victoria's weight, kidney function, and metal burden. "Initial chelation will mobilize metals from tissue storage," Marcus explained as he started the infusion under Dr. Lane's supervision. "Temporary symptom worsening is normal as metals enter circulation before elimination." Victoria lay on the hospital bed, her business attire replaced by a gown that made her vulnerable in ways $12 billion couldn't protect against. How long before we know if it's working? 12 to 18 hours for metal mobilization, 48 hours for immune response. If I'm correct, cognitive function improves first, followed by muscle strength and joint pain relief. Robert stepped closer, his voice carrying false concern. And if you're wrong? What happens when this experimental treatment kills her? Marcus met Robert's hostile gaze steadily. If I'm wrong, chelation will have no significant effect, and she can proceed with gene therapy. Conservative dosing makes serious adverse effects extremely unlikely. Extremely unlikely isn't impossible, Robert pressed. You're gambling with her life based on theories developed while mopping floors. The racist implication poisoned the air, but Victoria's voice cut through the tension. Robert, I've made my decision. Either support it or leave. I'm trying to protect you from a fatal mistake. You're trying to protect your inheritance. The accusation silenced Robert temporarily, but his expression promised continued confrontation, regardless of outcome. Marcus focused on his patient, checking vitals and documenting baseline measurements. The first 6 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Victoria experienced expected metal mobilization symptoms, mild nausea, headache, increased fatigue as chelated metals entered her bloodstream. Robert interpreted every discomfort as evidence of Marcus's incompetence. Then, at hour 8, something remarkable happened. The brain fog is lifting, Victoria announced, her voice carrying clarity absent for months. I can think clearly for the first time since this started. Dr. Lane immediately began cognitive assessments, testing memory, attention, and processing speed. Victoria's performance showed marked improvement from baseline scores. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her mind functioned at levels she hadn't experienced in nearly a year. Placebo effect, Robert insisted desperately. She feels better because she wants to feel better. By hour 16, improvements became undeniable. Victoria's muscle tremors decreased significantly. Joint pain dropped from constant agony to manageable discomfort. Most importantly, energy levels returned to something approaching normal for the first time in months. Marcus continued monitoring with quiet intensity, documenting every parameter while avoiding premature celebration. He'd learned from his mother's illness that medical improvements could be temporary. At hour 24, Dr. Lane performed comprehensive neurological testing that confirmed observable improvements. Victoria Sterling was getting better, not just feeling better, but demonstrably improving, according to objective measurements that couldn't be explained by wishful thinking. Metal elimination proceeds exactly as predicted, Marcus reported, reviewing blood chemistry results. Europium levels dropped 60%, dysprosium down 73%, terbium showing similar reduction. Robert's face went pale watching his inheritance evaporate with his sister's toxic burden. This doesn't prove anything long-term. Temporary improvement doesn't mean permanent cure. But Victoria was sitting up without assistance, her movements coordinated and purposeful in ways impossible just days earlier. For the first time in 8 months, she looked like someone who would live. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus Thompson, the janitor dismissed and attacked for daring to offer medical expertise, had proven that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected sources. But this was just the beginning. What happened next will restore your faith in justice. The transformation in Victoria Sterling was undeniable. After 48 hours of chelation therapy, she stood at the conference room window overlooking Manhattan, her posture straight and movements fluid for the first time in 8 months. The tremors had vanished. The cognitive fog had lifted. The woman who'd been preparing for experimental gene therapy with 80% mortality rates was now discussing business strategies with her characteristic sharp focus. Dr. Lane completed her final neurological assessment with barely concealed amazement. Complete normalization of reflexes, coordination, and cognitive function. Mr. Thompson, this is remarkable work. Marcus felt a profound satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with honoring his mother's memory. Environmental medicine saves lives when we're willing to look beyond conventional diagnostic categories. Robert Sterling slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon, watching $12 billion slip permanently beyond his reach. His racist assumptions hadn't just been morally wrong, they'd been catastrophically expensive. Victoria was going to live, thrive, and remember exactly how her brother had tried to prevent her recovery. "The board will want a full presentation," Victoria said, her voice carrying executive authority that illness had temporarily stolen. "Marcus, I'm creating a new position director of environmental medicine research. Full medical school funding included, naturally." Dr. Lane stepped forward with an offer that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. "Johns Hopkins would be honored to offer you a research fellowship, Mr. Thompson. Your diagnostic approach deserves wider recognition." Marcus considered the opportunities spreading before him like doors opening onto futures he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. Medical school completion, research position, the chance to prevent other families from experiencing what his mother had endured. "I accept the research position," Marcus said to Victoria. "And I accept your marriage proposal." The room fell silent. Victoria raised an eyebrow with amusement rather than surprise. "You're serious about that part? You made an offer in good faith when you were desperate. I honored my part by saving your life. Now you honor yours." Victoria studied Marcus with new respect, recognizing someone who understood that integrity meant keeping commitments even when circumstances changed. "Then I suppose we have a wedding to plan." Robert's expression promised that family dinners would be interesting for years to come. 6 months later, the Sterling Medical Center boardroom hosted a very different kind of meeting. Victoria Sterling Thompson sat at the head of the polished table, her maiden name now hyphenated with that of the man who'd saved her life and become her equal partner in both marriage and medicine. The quarterly board meeting was reviewing the most profitable year in company history, driven largely by breakthrough treatments in environmental medicine that had revolutionized autoimmune care. Marcus Thompson, now Dr. Marcus Thompson after completing his medical degree through an accelerated program, presented research findings that had attracted international attention. "Our environmental medicine division has identified similar toxic exposures in 47 cases across 12 countries. The treatment protocols we've developed show consistent success rates exceeding 90%. The same doctors who'd initially dismissed Marcus as a delusional janitor now cited his research in their own publications. Dr. Lane had co-authored 3 papers with him that were reshaping how medical schools taught environmental toxicology. Even Dr. Weber had invited Marcus to speak at the Swiss Medical Conference, a reversal that spoke volumes about the power of results over prejudice. But the most dramatic transformation sat at the far end of the table, where Robert Sterling occupied a much diminished role as Junior Vice President of Operations, a position Victoria had created specifically to keep him under close supervision while forcing him to confront his biases daily. "Robert's racism training is progressing well," Victoria reported matter-of-factly, as if discussing quarterly earnings. "Dr. Williams believes another 6 months of therapy should address the underlying supremacist attitudes that nearly cost me my life." Robert's face had aged considerably since his inheritance dreams collapsed. Court-mandated psychological evaluation had revealed deep-seated racial prejudices that the family's lawyers had insisted on addressing through comprehensive therapy rather than public scandal. He was required to work directly under Marcus's supervision, a daily reminder that the man he'd tried to destroy was now his superior in every measurable way. "The Environmental Medicine Foundation has received its largest donation to date," Marcus announced, pulling up financial projections. "The Hoffman Family Trust contributed $50 million specifically for research into luxury product toxicity affecting underserved communities." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus had transformed his personal tragedy into a research mission that would prevent countless others from suffering similar losses. His mother's death had become the foundation for discoveries that would save lives across economic and racial boundaries. Victoria smiled at her husband with genuine affection that had surprised everyone, including herself. Their marriage had begun as a desperate bargain, but evolved into partnership based on mutual respect and shared mission. Marcus has also been invited to testify before Congress about regulatory gaps in luxury manufacturing safety standards. The pharmaceutical empire that Victoria had inherited was now leading industry changes rather than following them. Sterling Pharmaceuticals had voluntarily implemented the most stringent environmental testing protocols in the industry, turning ethical leadership into competitive advantage. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. The therapy sessions have been educational, he admitted reluctantly. I'm beginning to understand how my assumptions about race and intelligence were not only morally wrong but factually baseless. It was the closest thing to an apology anyone had heard from him, though Marcus suspected it would take years before Robert's transformation became genuine rather than performative. The wedding anniversary celebration next month will include a scholarship announcement, Victoria continued. The Elena Thompson Memorial Fund will provide full medical school funding for students from underserved communities who demonstrate Marcus's combination of clinical insight and environmental awareness. Marcus felt his mother's presence in that moment, her life's work finally receiving the recognition and continuation she'd deserved. The janitor who'd been dismissed and attacked had become the architect of systemic change that would reshape medicine for generations. Justice had arrived not through punishment, but through the much more satisfying path of proving that excellence transcends every barrier that prejudice attempts to construct. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Medical School, delivering the keynote address that would have seemed impossible when he was cleaning their conference rooms. His environmental medicine protocols had saved over 300 lives worldwide, transforming luxury-induced autoimmune disease from a death sentence into a treatable condition. Victoria sat in the front row, their 6-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. The Sterling Thompson Environmental Medicine Institute had become the global leader in identifying and treating toxicity-related illnesses that traditional medicine had missed for decades. Robert worked quietly in the background now, his transformation from racist saboteur to humbled advocate serving as proof that even the most entrenched prejudices could be overcome through consistent exposure to truth. Excellence doesn't announce itself with credentials or pedigree, Marcus concluded his lecture. It shows up quietly, persistently, and waits for the world to become desperate enough to listen. Sometimes the person who can save you is the one you least expect, if you're brave enough to ignore the voices trying to silence them. Have you ever been the one with the answer while others tried to silence you because of who you are? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone facing similar challenges today. And here's something for sharp-eyed viewers. Go back to minute 2:30 and watch Robert's facial expression when Marcus first mentions environmental triggers. You'll see the exact moment he realizes his inheritance is in jeopardy. If this story reminded you that brilliance comes in unexpected forms, and that keeping your word matters even when it costs everything, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone deserves to see talent recognized over prejudice, and love built on respect rather than desperation.